The world of violence is varied. And that means that there's so many variables in everything that has to do with violence that it's sometimes difficult to see what is realistic, what is possible, what you should or shouldn't do. And in that regard, we just had an interesting discussion in the Facebook group a while ago about an incident that happened in South Africa. You see a man standing outside of his car, and there's two, three assailants that try to close the gap, get close to him, attack him, rob him. It's not quite sure, but you can be certain that they don't have positive or good intentions. That is clear. The interesting part is that the man is holding a knife. So at first he's holding it in reverse grip, and he is switching left and right because he's in a pincer move by his assailants. So he's dividing his attention by quickly looking left and right, moving left and right to keep them at bay. He is successful at that. But there's a few things that I want to mention about this that I found interesting. And the first one is this is a typical attack pattern. You have multiple opponents that will try to put themselves in a tactically superior position to you. In this case, position themselves to either side of you so you can't see them both at the same time. That means that while one distracts you, the other one can close the gap, and so on. Typically, this works extremely well. In this case, because the defender has a knife, it's a lot trickier for them because they have to close the gap knowing that if they don't succeed, they might get stabbed, slashed, and die, which is the reality of somebody using a knife on you. That is always on the table. Now, when you watch the reactions of these attackers to the man defending himself with a blade like that, you can see that they're extremely careful. They don't just rush in. They try to time their advance just when the man isn't looking their way. And when they notice that the timing is off, when he quickly turns around again, they immediately back up. Now, in one case, one of the attackers narrowly escapes a downward stabbing motion from the defender. Again, he's hacking at the guy, and he narrowly misses. Now, this goes on for several seconds. Doesn't take all that long. And at a certain point, the man actually loses his balance and drops the knife, but he immediately picks it back up again and continues to try to scare them off, which is successful. They move away, and the funny part is that they are walking only a few yards away from the defender and doing so very casually. They're like, we don't have to worry about this. Okay, we're walking away. That guy's not going to follow us. We're not going to attack him anymore. It's over. So there's a very different mindset when it comes to using violence that these men have, as opposed to many other people in other places. Now, we discussed this a little bit, and there were a few really interesting comments. One of them was from James, and he said that it looks like a nature documentary where a group of predators unsuccessfully tries to take on a prey animal that has more fight than they expected. And you can find so many examples of this when you look at nature documentaries, or one of my favorites, the Instagram account Nature is Metal, which is pretty gruesome because nature is a gruesome place. That shows exactly that predators try to take an animal down, and the animal fights back, or they try to steal the kill from one predator and think that they can steal his kill and eat it and get away, and he's not having it. That animal fights back, and that happens with multiple of these scavengers trying to steal their food, and it doesn't always succeed. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Here's the point. What they do then, as soon as that big predator rears his head and basically scares them off, they back up. They know that in a one-on-one fight, they're not going to win. They're going to pay for it. So they back off. They try, They try multiple times, but they don't throw away their life. And this is what happens here with these attackers. What you see them do is be very aware of the intent of the defender. He's clearly willing to use that knife. Clearly, there's no doubt about that. They recognize his intent. And at the same time, they also understand the reality of getting stabbed or slashed by a committed opponent, somebody who's not holding back, as evidenced with that one downward stab that you see him do, is that if the guy hadn't backed up, it would have landed. I mean, he would have been struck in the chest or in the neck area. They seem to understand that you can't just idly walk forward and ignore the damage that a knife can do. And this is in stark contrast to a lot of the videos that I could show you from people in the West who simply ignore the reality of the damage, the instant damage that a knife can do. Just recently on my Patreon, I covered the now infamous video, I think it was in Australia or New Zealand. A bunch of guys, two groups have a fight. One guy walks away, the other group advances, taunts him, and they not really chase after that guy just yet, but they keep following him until he stands his ground and pulls a knife. Like, you can see the knife in his hand. It's not hidden at all. And then one guy just, he moves like he's in a boxing match, feinting, moving forward and backwards, and narrowly misses getting stabbed, very narrowly. His friend, on the other hand, totally oblivious, apparently, to the real dangers of edged weapons, walks forward, walks right into range of the guy holding the knife, and gets stabbed in the neck for his troubles and dies. It's like throwing a jab. That was the speed of that knife strike. It was in and out. It was over in a fraction of a second. And the guy bleeds out and he's gone. This is what a friend of mine, he mentioned that also in the comments, is that the true fear is present in reality. This is one of the big issues that I see is a problem in much of the training that we see when it comes to knife use, weapon use, knife defense, and so on. And I wrote an article not that long ago on my blog. It's called How to Train with Edged Weapons. And he calls it true fear. My friend and I call it existential fear. And the thing is that when it's for real, it's very different from training environment, from a sparring environment, and so on. Even if you train hardcore, if you train full contact and so on, there's a part of your brain, part of your mind that still knows that it's not real. We're just training, even though it will hurt. He's still not trying to kill me. Well, that goes away when it is for real. And all of a sudden, you face this existential fear, meaning that if I make a mistake here, or even if I don't make a mistake here, but the guy is better than me, or Mr. Murphy comes along and something bad happens by accident, I'm dead. It is this existential fear that I often see missing when people train, in that they train in a way that basically pretends that you will not feel that fear. Now, granted, like the example that I just gave from, again, New Zealand or Australia, I don't remember, that guy didn't seem to have any fear, walked right into the range of a guy wielding a knife, and he died because of it. So some people don't feel that fear, but not rightfully so. It's not a good idea, as evidenced by his death. He clearly ignored the fear, if he had any at all, and he died because of it. Other people who have more an understanding of what the true reality is of violence, how you dying is always an option, it's always possible. As soon as the fighting starts, it can end with somebody dying or multiple people dying. It can be by accident, it can be by choice, it can be by the situation escalating way beyond what either party initially wanted, but somebody dying is always a possibility. There are numerous cases in which somebody gets punched in the head, they fall down, they crack their skull on the pavement or on the floor, and they die. It happens. When you have an edged weapon that is involved, the odds of that multiply. Now, again, like I said, very often in the West, people don't seem to understand that reality anymore. My pet peeve is that it's about watching too many TV shows and movies. And I just did this whole episode with Barry Eisler, a best-selling novelist, about the differences between fictional violence and real violence. So you can listen to that episode as well. But the point is that I've seen it more and more, whereas the people who are actually experienced or have seen real violence with edged weapons throughout their life tend to be a lot more cautious, tend to understand that you can't just ignore, you can't just soak up the punches, so to speak, when somebody has a knife. You can't just close your guard and block and then wait for your counter punch that you can land. The damage you take is exponentially more than from simply blocking a punch or a kick. And it can be over in one strike. That is basically my main message that I want to give in this episode. And the main point, if you will, that I want to touch upon is that if you train at different levels of intensity. You don't have to train hardcore all the time, but you shouldn't train too easily all the time either. Shouldn't make it too easy on yourself either. No matter how hard you make it, no matter how hardcore you train, with lots of scenario training, full contact impact, and so on, it's still not going to be the same thing as real life. Now, some encounters, things happen so fast, you don't have time to even acknowledge that there is a weapon in play, and it's all over, and if all goes well, you come out in one piece. But not all encounters are like that. There's more than just being ambushed. There is, like in this case of this video here, when you actually see both assailants or the three assailants, and you actually do have time to act and draw your weapon and use it, and so on. The defender could have made mistakes by just rushing one guy, leaving his back exposed, and then getting taken out by the other guy. Now, the one guy might have gone down, but the other two are going to take the defender out then. So just because he has a weapon doesn't mean that he's safe. And like I said, at one point he does drop it, he falls to his knees, but he does pick it back up again and immediately goes on the offensive and tries to scare them off, which he's successful at. So that is an example of how in real life things go wrong. They often do. Nobody wants to fall on the ground when you're defending yourself against multiple opponents, knife or no knife. You will drop your weapon, it happens, so train for it. And at the same time, understanding that two things: if you are the one holding that weapon, you have to have the commitment to actually use it. If you don't have that commitment, don't expect the opponent or the attacker to just simply be scared off when he sees the knife. If at the same time he sees that you're basically trembling on your legs and you don't have the commitment to actually use it. If you're on the opposing side of an equation of violence where somebody attacks you with a knife, then understand that your life may end right then and there. So you have to take it seriously. Doesn't mean you have to show that you are scared, that you feel that existential fear. Most of all, it also doesn't mean you give in to that fear and just give up and just, lay down and die. Absolutely not. But it does mean that you have to accept that that's likely to happen. Now, existential fear manifests itself in different ways with different people. That's beyond the scope of this episode. But the point is that if it's the first time you actually feel it, it can be quite difficult to overcome it. The best solution that I've found in training is especially when it comes to training with edged weapons or defending against edged weapons, auto weapons, and so on, is take it incredibly seriously. Is be hyper focused and not play around, not play at defending, which is what, again, too many people do, in my opinion, and what I've written about in the article. I'll link that in the show notes. So I would very much recommend that you work on that. Try to absolutely avoid ignoring this critical factor that is existential fear. And if you are unfortunate enough to end up having to use techniques to defend yourself in such a situation, understand that you can overcome that fear. Best in training, try to train in such a way that you set yourself up for success. But also, even if you haven't been able to train it and it is the first time you encounter that it is perfectly possible to overcome that fear and survive that attack. But it takes a fair bit of determination to pull that off if the fear hits you hard for the very first time. So one of the things that I would recommend also is that you take some time to actually think this through and work on your mindset. That your goal is to survive, your goal is to stay in one piece. Your goal is not to beat up the other guy. Your goal is not to show, how many fancy techniques that you can pull off in real life. Your goal is to make it out in one piece and get back home. That is the goal. And that might mean overcoming that existential fear. Right, that's it. That's all I wanted to say. Again, this is an You Are Not Aries episode, so they're a little bit shorter. So what do you have to look forward to next week? I will do a full episode, and that one will be about how to make money or how to make a living with martial arts. This one is one of my patrons, SK. He asked me that question in a private message recently, and I figured that that's going to be too much for a quick Q&A on Patreon, which is the videos that I often do. They're relatively short. So, and also I think that I had this question multiple times in the past from various people. I don't recall if I ever did a full podcast episode on that. So I'll go over that. Why? Well, because I've been teaching professionally for almost 30 years now, both as a personal trainer and as a martial artist. So I do have a fair bit of experience with that. I've got books, videos, Patreon, blogs, and all that kind of stuff. So I do have a bit of experience with that, and I haven't gone bankrupt just yet, knock on wood. So let's hope that doesn't happen. And that's what I'll talk about in next week's episode. And then there's going to be another You Are Not Aries episode, and then the interview with Terry Trahan that I did about what it takes to survive and get out of what we call the life, the dark side of society, so to speak. It was a really good interview in the sense that it was an excellent talk. Terry, he shared a lot of information. It was obviously very personal for the both of us, actually. So hope you guys will enjoy that one. That's coming up in a few weeks then. In the meantime, as always, like, share, subscribe. Join me on Patreon for some exclusive content if you want to support the show. And if not, just share this episode with anybody who might want to listen to it. That always helps out a lot. Word of mouth is basically how this podcast and my blog grows. Well, that's it, folks. Take care. Thanks for listening. Bye.